We're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. That's right, you're listening to Coming Out Christian, a podcast about life at the intersection of queer identity and Christian faith. This fun, faithful, and sometimes irreverent podcast is a production of Love Boldly, an Ohio-based nonprofit creating spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity. I'm one of your hosts, Siobhan Nelson, and my co-host is the Reverend Dr. Ben Huelskamp, Executive Director of Love Boldly. So join us, and let's find out who's coming out today. Welcome to episode number 1 of Coming Out Christian, a brand new podcast brought to you by Love Boldly, a nonprofit in Columbus, Ohio. My name is Siobhan Nelson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am joined by...
Hi, everyone. I'm the Reverend Dr. Ben Huelskamp. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm very happy to have the privilege of being the executive director here in Love Boldly.
Well, Ben, to kick everything off, why don't we start by telling folks why we started a podcast? Sure, podcasts are very hot right now in the zeitgeist. If you're anyone, then you've got a podcast, and I think I've been secretly planning to start a podcast for maybe the past 7 years. But why now? Why Love Boldly? Why are we doing this podcast?
Sure. Podcasts definitely are hot. And I personally did one for about a year, 2 years ago. And we've done some podcast formats through Love Boldly in the past. So we're definitely standing on a bit of a legacy with our organization. But for this podcast, we really wanted to focus on this kind of dual interest and dual tension that many LGBTQIA plus Christians experience, having to come out or having the experience of coming out as queer people in a Christian context, and also as Christians in an LGBTQIA plus context. And some of us, many of us perhaps, have sometimes experienced more inclusion actually on the church side than we have on the LGBTQIA plus side. We know that there are stories of queer Christians, of LGBTQIA plus Christ followers who have often felt silent or have been silenced to talk about this tension, to talk about this duality of being faithful Christians while at the same time being active and very faithful LGBTQIA plus community members.
Absolutely. And I can say that I personally have felt that tension, and I think I'm feeling it particularly in this moment. We can just say that this is a fraught moment for both LGBTQIA plus people and Christ followers. Notice I said Christ followers, those of us who are following the progressive and radical gospel of Christ. And that tension is particular in this moment because I am led by my faith to pray, and to pray for and pray with my community, my LGBTQIA plus community in particular. And it can feel a little strange, Ben, looking at my queer folks, at my queer fam, and saying, hey, y'all, you want to get together and pray about this? Because that is not, I think, an advocacy tool that many of us in this community often go to. And for me personally, it is an advocacy tool. And I think I want to talk about that. And others might want to talk about that as well.
Definitely.
Well, Ben, and before we go too much further, should we give folks a little bit of background on who Love Boldly is, this wonderful nonprofit organization that you are the executive director of, our fearless leader? Can you just tell folks a little bit about what the organization does and how they can learn more about us and how to get engaged?
Sure. So Love Boldly is an Ohio-based, faith-based organization working to create more spaces where LGBTQIA plus people can flourish within Christianity. That said, we work in an interfaith context, and that may be new for some of our listeners. We are a decidedly Christian organization, um, but that doesn't mean that we don't work with, we don't reach out to, and accept outreaches to us from people of many different faiths, as well as people who are just great, wonderful human beings who may not have a faith tradition of their own, may not have a faith background of their own. We're really open to working with a range of people. Most of our work falls into one of three buckets, as I call them. We do education and training for the general public, for pastors, for congregations. We create resources. We just recently, actually at the beginning of this year, released our 52-week devotional, speaking of prayer, um, that brings together about 50 different authors, queer and allied. Um, we have a resource called Words Can Crush, which is on kind of a glossary of terms and best terms to use while working for and with the queer community. And finally, the last bucket we work in is we engage in issue-based organizing and faith-based organizing. We show up particularly at the Ohio State House to help push back against some of the harmful bills, policies, legislation that are coming out of that space. I will say we are a 501c3 nonprofit. What that means in a nutshell is we do not engage in partisan politics. We do not engage in lobbying of any kind, but we often will help people who want more information and want to engage in some of that work, again, from a faith-based perspective, to do that work. Folks can find us at www.loveboldly.net. If you saw any of the advertisements for this podcast, you probably saw that our podcast link. That's also a great place to check us out. All of our information lives on the web. So definitely check out our website, check out our social media. We're on most major platforms. If anyone is looking for more information, they can definitely reach out to me. My email is available on the website.
Amazing. Thank you, Ben. I really do hope that folks heard something in there that caught their attention and that they will reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or TikTok, or email Ben. Ben loves to grab coffee with folks. All right, so folks know who we are a little bit. They know who Love Boldly is, why we're here, but why don't we give them a little bit of background on the two of us, since we will be the hosts of this podcast. These are the voices that folks are going to be hearing. I think that they should know a little bit about our backgrounds and about our stories, and what might be interesting about having the two of us host a podcast together, Ben. I think those of us, those who know us well in the community, might say, oh, that might be a little bit, I wouldn't say oil and water, but we're definitely coming from two different places here as we approach Christian faith, and yet have so much in common and have very similar stories as it pertains to the role that faith has played in our lives and continue to play in our lives. So start us off, Ben. Tell us about your background. Did you grow up in the church? Are you still active in the church? I say that knowing that you are the Reverend Doctor. But let us in, Ben. Tell us about you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yes, I definitely was raised in the church. I grew up Roman Catholic. My dad's family um, goes all the way back to Germany as good German Catholics. My mom converted to Catholicism. She grew up Baptist. But faith and church were integral parts of my life growing up. Our congregation was located just 4 blocks away from from the house I grew up in. We were always at church. My parents were always involved in church, and I pretty much took after them in that regard. I attended kindergarten through 12th grade in Catholic schools, and was just, that was just a huge part of my life, to the point that I was pretty much prepared to be a Roman Catholic priest, at least until I came out. But the church has remained, unlike many of our queer siblings, the church for me actually was a place of real welcome and acceptance. When I came out in college, the Episcopal campus ministry on my campus just kind of wrapped me in a lot of love. And it was in the context of that community that I came out. I am still very involved in the church, obviously leading Love Boldly, which is a faith-based organization. I'm also the pastor of Blue Ocean Faith Columbus. Um, and yes, I do have that wonderful Reverend Doctor title. Um, but before I got involved in nonprofits, I worked in higher ed, um, and just have always really felt a call to education, to training, to mentoring, to helping people in whatever circumstance they may find themselves in. Um, I I will say I'm definitely from a very theological background. I'm from a very liturgical background. I'm from a home congregation where clapping was literally prohibited. And if you're wondering why I mentioned clapping, you'll find out in a few minutes when Siobhan starts. Um, but but nevertheless, um, yeah, I've been very involved in the church, and I remain very involved in the church. So, what about you, Siobhan? Is your background also one where clapping was prohibited, and hymns were pretty traditional overall?
Open. No, clapping was not prohibited. Clapping was de rigueur, I would say, even. It was expected, if not more. So I also grew up in a pretty religious household, but my background was apostolic Pentecostal. Meaning that we essentially did all of the things that Ben's pastor would absolutely be appalled by. When you think apostolic Pentecostal and you think the singing and the dancing and the hands raised and the speaking in tongues, and the music that and the services that go on for 3.5 hours, all of that was my background. But like Ben, I did go to a parochial school for 12 years. I went to a Nazarene Christian school for 12 years, and but then went to Howard University. I did not do what Ben did and did not stay on that path. Went to Howard University, and then actually went to law school, practiced as an attorney for a bit, and then got into the nonprofit world here in the Columbus community. And the church, I would say, unlike Ben's experience, the church was not a place of refuge for me. It was a place of, I would say, crisis, and deep trauma, and trauma that has continued into my adulthood, unfortunately. So, there is, of course, growing up with an apostolic Pentecostal background, being a queer individual and knowing that you are a queer individual is something that is definitely going to put your soul and your spirit in question. I think the thing that I heard the most was that I was an abomination. And I believed that about myself. And that really played into how I felt about myself, what I thought about myself during, those really formative years of my life growing up. And so I've had to do a lot of work personally around that. And then, unfortunately, that was followed by some additional church trauma. Once my wife and I, my wife grew up Roman Catholic. And that's funny. So if you're wondering if Ben and I could ever go to a church service together and enjoy a church service together, I'm going to say it's possible because my wife and I were members of a church together for over 5 years. And absolutely both enjoyed it. It was a UCC church, if you're wondering out there how to find the perfect spot for a Pentecostal and a Roman Catholic. The UCC church was a great place for us. Where was I going with that? So, sorry about that, Ben. I get on tangents. Sorry for the listeners. It's a thing I do. Bond gets on tangents. But then when we were in that church for 5 years, and then that pastor left us, right? And so that pastor decided, or redecided, that we were abominations, essentially. And so after doing all of that work, here we were faced with this church trauma once again, which we are still working through. So I think that, what I can bring to this, and I'm still here. Let me say that I am still here. I am a faithful person. I said a little bit earlier that, my advocacy tool that I am reaching for in this moment of crisis is prayer. So I am still a person of faith in spite of. And I think that is actually a powerful thing. I know that I am not alone, that there are many, many powerful people in our community like me who remain faithful people in spite of. And I think that faith that remains through all of this is a very particular faith, and it has a particular power. And I want to release that into our community by telling these stories. So yes, Ben, I would clap. I don't know that I could not go to church with you, Ben, and at the same time, you'd probably feel a little awkward and odd in church with me, as my wife has felt in apostolic Pentecostal spaces before, where you're kind of looked at funny if you don't shout once in a while.
Well, to be fair, I will say I am pursuing ordination right now in the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, which, if any of our listeners
Beautiful.
know about, was founded by Bishop Yvette Flunder, who is very much
Yes.
from a Church of God Pentecostal type background. So I have been told to get ready for our convocation this summer.
Ooh.
And to break out of the Catholic liturgical bubble, which I mostly have, but to get ready, and to perhaps not trust that the service will end after an hour and a half.
Oh, Ben, the order of service will be led by the movement of the Holy Spirit. And we will not limit the Holy Spirit to an hour and a half. But we will limit this podcast to half an hour. That's what you can expect from us each week. And, I really look forward to hearing more of your story, Ben, as we go and we dive into our guest stories. So speaking of stories and guests, why don't we talk about that? Folks aren't just going to hear from us every week. That would get boring. And this really is about the stories of people of faith, people who have backgrounds in faith, not just Christian faith, people who have come out Christian in different spaces. And so, Ben, tell me about the stories that you're excited to hear about as we produce this podcast.
Sure. Well, I think for me, it's really hearing from folks who are living this out day in, day out. I admit, as the leader of a faith-based nonprofit working with a lot of pastors, I sit in spaces that are very pastor-driven, very theologian-driven. That's not to say that those spaces don't include a lot of queer folks who are living in this tension, just like you and I are. But at the same time, I always love hearing from people who are living these dynamics out, not as their professional life, but as part of their overall lives. I know there's a term that you've used for yourself in the past. I still use as a professional queer.
Yes.
There are some times that we professional queers are in our, LGBTQ job bubbles and forget about what's outside of those bubbles. The same is very true for pastors, for clergy, for others in our church bubbles.
Yes.
So I can't wait to hear from folks for whom these dynamics are just something that's so core to who they are, but are not necessarily part of their professional or even volunteer lives.
Absolutely. And I'm really interested in hearing where people have been and what they've overcome. And I think that comes from my love of history and context. I'm always a believer that we have to know where we've been and to learn the lesson, and so that we don't repeat it. And I cannot wait to learn the lessons that I know these lives are going to teach us. lessons that we need so much in this moment. Yeah, folks' history is beautiful. It's amazing. I also believe that we don't know enough about one another, about our community, about the history of our community, speaking specifically of the queer community. We don't come from queer families, right? The same way that you might come from a black family or a Roman Catholic family, where you're going to have that history passed down to you. So we have to do a little bit of that work ourselves, and this is part of that work of making sure that we know our history and are capable of learning the lessons from it, and then being the stewards of it and passing it down to the next generation.
Totally, totally.
So, Ben, folks aren't just going to hear from us and our guests. We're also going to have a couple of segments that people can look forward to in each podcast. The first one is called the Queerie. Yes, that is a pun. The Queerie of the Day. And today's Queerie of the Day comes about because today, or the day of release for this first episode, is April 20th, also known as 420. And that is a holiday that some people celebrate, not everybody, but those that do celebrate 420 are known to get the munchies. So, Ben, my question for you, my query of the day for you is, what is your favorite Easter munchie? Whether that be a snack or if you just love getting those hard-boiled eggs.
Well, for me, it's hard. It comes down to two things that they're pretty much related. First are the Reese's peanut butter cup eggs
Mm-hmm.
that are just peanut butter cups in a different format.
Yes.
Those are those are favorites. And then because I associate it with Easter, is there's a chocolate company here in Central Ohio, Anthony Thomas, that we would always have these. They're half chocolate eggs, you know, about 6 inches long or so, filled with some
Ooh,
of the other Anthony Thomas candy. They would sell them at our church for a fundraiser. So that was
okay.
always part of Easter morning for us.
Wow. Okay. So I actually don't like sweets. So if I did perhaps get the munchies, I'm actually probably going to find something savory, and it really is going to be deviled eggs. I really do. I love the fact that deviled eggs are now in season, and we can start making them again and having them at family dinners. They're going to show up at Easter. They're going to show up at every barbecue all the way through the summer. It is officially deviled egg season.
Awesome. Awesome. One of our other segments is going to be what we're calling a moment in queer history. Um, and I'd like to start our first moment in queer history by just reminding us all that we have always been here. And I say that as we have always been here as an LGBTQIA plus community, as a queer community. We may not have always used those terms. We may
Mhm.
not always have been able to show our love, to show our gender identity, to show our sexual orientation in public ways. But we've always been here. And there are definitely queer people in the Bible.
Oh
And
yeah.
one of those, or two of those, I should say, are David and Jonathan. David, who becomes the king of the Israelites, Jonathan, who is the son of King Saul, are more than a few times talked about in the Bible, in the Old Testament, particularly in the or the books attributed to the prophet Samuel, as loving each other as they would love women, being having their souls being knit together in very almost marriage language, if not marriage language. A lot of people disagree about that. Were they just knit together as brothers? Were they actually some sort of prototype of, husbands? Um, but it's clear that when Jonathan dies in battle, David, who is now the king, tears his garments. He's just absolutely beside himself that Jonathan has died. And again, says that his love for Jonathan is greater than his love for any woman. So again, we've always been there. We can find ourselves in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, as well as history throughout what we consider Christian history. And again, over some of these episodes, we'll be looking at some other moments in queer history.
I cannot wait, Ben. Like I said, I love history. And I know that, history is written by the victors, right? And so oftentimes we don't hear about it. Again, we don't know our history. And this is, again, part of trying to share that history, make sure that we know that we have always been here and we have always been here in the church. So we absolutely belong in the church. All right, Ben. I think we are ending the end of our episode, nearing the end of our episode, and it is time for us to wrap up episode 1. Any closing thoughts that you have for folks?
No, just totally excited for this journey with you, Siobhan, with our guests, with our listeners. Definitely would encourage any listeners who do want to reach out. You can find my email on the website. We would love to hear from folks. We would love to hear what you're hoping to see out of this podcast as well. So definitely reach out to us. And again, definitely please check out our Love Boldly website, www.loveboldly.net.
Thanks, Ben. I agree about the excitement. I am so excited to be reaching new folks who don't yet know about Love Boldly, who don't yet know that there are a community of Christians in different faith practices throughout the state of Ohio, throughout this country, throughout this world. I think that's what excites me the most, the opportunity for us to find community, fellowship. Let's say it. It's for us to find fellowship with one another, which is such an important part of any faith life. And this is something that I'm so excited to meet new folks and to see who shows up in our community through this podcast.
Thank you for listening to Coming Out Christian with Siobhan Boyd Nelson and me, Ben Huelskamp. Do you want to see content like this continue to be produced? Then please support Love Boldly with a donation and consider becoming a monthly donor. You can donate online at www.loveboldly.net/donate. Join us next time as we continue to engage with people who proudly say that we're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. And we're not going anywhere.